My name is Caleb Morrison, and 3 years ago, I took a night security job I still think about sometimes. At the time, I was doing temporary work all over Montana, mostly quiet overnight jobs nobody else wanted. Old warehouses, storage lots, construction sites, places where nothing usually happened. I actually preferred working nights. Everything felt slower then, quieter, less crowded. Most shifts were simple. Bring coffee, stay awake, walk around every hour, then leave in the morning. That was exactly what I expected when I accepted the station job. The listing barely explained anything. It only said the property needed overnight supervision for 1 week while surveyors inspected the land nearby. The pay was unusually high, especially for such an easy assignment. So I accepted it without thinking much about it. The station sat far outside a small town called Belmore, almost 40 minutes away from the nearest gas station. I remember driving there late in the evening, watching long empty roads disappear into forest and hills. A light rain had started earlier that afternoon. Soft, steady rain tapping gently against the windshield, the kind that made the entire drive feel slower and quieter. By the time I reached the property, the sky had turned completely dark. The station appeared suddenly beside the road, old, massive, and almost completely abandoned. Tall iron lamps lined the platform, though only 2 still worked, casting weak yellow light across wet concrete. Several train tracks stretched into darkness behind the building. Rust covered nearly everything, even the old station sign hanging above the entrance. Belmore Station. Some letters barely remained visible anymore. I parked beside the building and shut off the engine. Immediately, the silence around the place felt strange. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence, like the entire station had been waiting there untouched for decades. I grabbed my flashlight, my backpack, and walked toward the entrance. Water dripped softly from the roof edges. Small puddles reflected the dim platform lights. The front doors groaned loudly when I pushed them open. Inside, the station looked frozen in time. Old wooden benches still sat beneath faded schedules. Dust covered the ticket counters, and large clocks hung high along the walls. Every single clock showed the same time, 2:17. I noticed it immediately, but assumed the clocks had simply stopped years ago. The air inside smelled like dust, wet concrete, and old paper. A portable heater hummed softly near the security office. Someone had left supplies for me there. Coffee, flashlights, extra batteries, a folding chair, and a clipboard full of instructions. The rules were simple. Walk the station every hour, check the entrances, report any trespassers. That was it. I sat down for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the quiet hum of the heater. Occasionally, I heard faint metallic noises somewhere outside. Probably the wind moving old signs or loose chains near the tracks. Still, something about the place felt unsettling, not dangerous exactly, just abandoned in a way that felt too complete. Like people had once been there constantly, then suddenly disappeared all at once. Around 10:30, I started my first walk through the station. My flashlight beam moved across cracked tile floors, dusty walls, and old advertisements peeling near the hallways. One poster still advertised train routes from the late 70s. Another showed smiling families boarding silver passenger cars. Everything looked faded now, almost ghost-like beneath the weak lights. I walked through the main waiting area slowly, my boots echoing softly through the empty building. Then I reached the platform doors leading outside. Cold air drifted through the cracks immediately. Outside, the track stretched endlessly into darkness, parallel lines disappearing into fog and trees. The rain had become lighter now, barely more than mist drifting through the station lights. I leaned briefly against one of the iron columns, listening to distant wind moving through the forest beyond the tracks. That was when I heard it for the first time. A metallic clanging sound, very far away. I frowned slightly, listening harder. Clang, 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 like loose metal striking against rails somewhere in the distance. Then came another sound. Footsteps. Slow footsteps walking across gravel near the tracks. I turned my flashlight toward the darkness immediately, but saw nothing. The beam barely reached beyond the nearest rails. The footsteps stopped completely. Silence returned again. I stayed there another minute, watching the empty tracks, trying to convince myself it was probably an animal. Eventually, I went back inside. The station felt warmer after the cold platform air, though not by much. I poured another cup of coffee, sat near the office, and checked the time on my phone. 11:04 p.m. Then I glanced toward the wall clocks again. Still 2:17. Every single one, exactly the same. Around midnight, the building started making more noise. Soft creaks inside the walls. Low metallic groans from somewhere beneath the floors. Occasional rattling sounds near the old ticket booths. Old buildings always make noise at night. I knew that. Still, the sounds felt unusually deliberate somehow. At one point, I could have sworn I heard distant voices echoing from one of the hallways. Not clear words, just faint conversation somewhere deeper inside the station. I stood up immediately and listened, but the sound vanished almost instantly. The heater near the office flickered slightly, then steadied again. I rubbed my eyes slowly, trying to stay focused. The night felt unusually long already. Around 1 a.m, I started another patrol, this time walking farther down the platform outside. Fog drifted low across the tracks now, thin white shapes moving slowly through darkness. The station lights barely illuminated anything beyond the first few rails. My flashlight swept across old cargo carts, broken signs, and weeds growing between sections of track. Everything looked still, until I noticed something farther down the platform, a figure, standing near the edge of the tracks, tall, motionless, wearing what looked like a long dark coat. I stopped walking immediately. The figure did not move. "Hello?" I called out softly. No response came back. The person simply stood there, facing away from me, perfectly still beneath the dim station lights. I took a few cautious steps forward, my flashlight shaking slightly now. Then the station loudspeaker crackled overhead without warning. Static exploded through the platform, loud enough to make me jump. The figure near the tracks vanished the exact moment I looked back toward the speakers. Gone completely. Only empty fog remained near the rails. Then, through heavy static, a woman's voice slowly echoed across the station. "Attention, please. The northbound train will be arriving shortly at platform 2. The loudspeaker went silent again almost immediately. Only faint static remained overhead. Soft crackling drifting through the empty station. I stood frozen on the platform, still staring toward the tracks where the figure had been. Nothing remained there now, only fog moving slowly across the rails. My heartbeat felt louder than everything else around me. I lowered the flashlight slightly, trying to calm myself down. "There's probably another worker here," I whispered to myself, but even while saying it, I already knew that explanation felt wrong. Nobody had mentioned other employees, and nobody could have disappeared that quickly I looked down the platform one more time, then finally headed back inside the station. The old doors shut behind me with a heavy thud. The warmth inside felt weak now, barely enough to cut through the cold air following me from outside. I walked toward the security office slowly, listening carefully to the building around me. The station had changed somehow, not physically, but the atmosphere felt different now, more awake. That was the only word I could think of. The hallways no longer felt abandoned. They felt occupied, quietly occupied. I sat near the portable heater again and checked my phone. Still no signal. That bothered me more than anything else. The town itself barely had good reception, but complete silence on the phone felt strange. I opened a small thermos of coffee and took a slow sip, trying to settle my nerves. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, inside the station this time, very distant, but unmistakable. Someone walking slowly across tile floors somewhere near the far hallway. Step, step, step. I immediately stood up, flashlight already in hand. The footsteps stopped the moment I moved. Silence returned once again. I waited several seconds, listening carefully. Nothing. The heater hummed softly behind me. Static whispered through the loudspeakers overhead, and somewhere outside, wind moved faintly along the tracks. That was all. Still, I knew what I heard. I began walking toward the far hallway slowly. The flashlight beam sliding across dusty walls and cracked floors. Most of the old station offices sat down that corridor. Small rooms with broken glass windows and faded signs on the doors. Ticket records, storage, maintenance, supervisor. Most rooms stood completely empty. Old filing cabinets remained scattered everywhere. Stacks of paper sat untouched beneath layers of dust. At the end of the hallway, I noticed a faint light coming from beneath one of the doors. I stopped walking immediately. That room had been dark earlier. I was certain of it. The light flickered softly beneath the doorway, pale yellow, weak, almost candle-like. I approached carefully, my boots echoing softly through the corridor. Then I noticed something else. The door itself was slightly open, only an inch or two, just enough for light to spill into the hallway. I pushed the door slowly with one hand. The hinges creaked quietly, long and low. Inside, an old office appeared before me. A wooden desk sat near the far wall, covered with papers and old train schedules, and beside the desk, a lamp glowed softly, though no power should have been running there. I stepped into the room carefully. The air felt colder inside. On the desk, I noticed several photographs scattered beneath dust, old black and white pictures of the station decades earlier. Crowded platforms, families carrying luggage, conductors standing beside silver trains. Everything looked normal at first. Then I noticed something strange about the people in the photos. Many faces appeared blurry, not damaged, just unclear, like the camera failed to capture them correctly. One photograph especially caught my attention. It showed passengers waiting beneath the station clock, and every clock in the picture showed the same time, 2:17. A cold feeling spread slowly through my chest. I set the photo down carefully, trying not to overthink it. Then I noticed an old notebook sitting near the edge of the desk. The cover looked worn and cracked with age. I opened it slowly. Most pages contained maintenance notes and employee schedules. But near the middle, the handwriting suddenly changed. The entries became uneven, messy, almost frantic. They keep arriving at 2:17. The station should have closed. They do not leave. I frowned immediately, reading faster now. The loudspeaker announces trains that no longer exist. I still hear passengers walking the platforms at night. The clock stopped after the accident. I froze at that line. Accident. I turned several more pages quickly, but most of the remaining writing had become unreadable. Dark ink smeared across the paper. Then, from somewhere above the station, a loud metallic bang echoed through the building. I nearly dropped the notebook. The sound rolled through the ceiling like something massive shifting overhead. A second later, the loudspeaker crackled alive again. Static burst through every hallway, far louder this time. Then, the woman's voice returned, calm, slow, almost distorted by age. Attention, please. Passengers for the northbound line should proceed to platform 2. The message repeated again, and again, and again, the same exact sentence looping endlessly through the station. I backed away from the desk slowly, heart pounding harder now. Then another sound joined the loudspeaker. Movement outside the office door. Several footsteps this time. Not one person, many. Slow footsteps crossing the hallway outside. I shut off my flashlight immediately, instinct taking over before I even thought about it. Darkness filled the office. Except for the weak lamp near the desk, the footsteps continued moving past the doorway. Step, step, step. Some sounded heavy, others lighter, like different people walking together slowly. I held my breath completely, listening in silence. Then I heard something else, soft murmuring voices, not clear enough to understand. Just low conversation drifting through the hallway. The sound made every hair on my arms rise instantly, because the voices sounded old, very old, like recordings from another time. The footsteps eventually faded deeper into the station. I stayed frozen inside the office for nearly a full minute. Then, finally, I stepped back into the hallway carefully, empty again. But the dust on the floor had changed. Fresh footprints now crossed the hallway tiles, dozens of them, some large, some small, all leading toward the main platform. A cold wave moved through my stomach. The loudspeaker continued repeating the same message overhead, slow, distorted, almost hypnotic. I followed the footprints carefully through the station, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me needed to know what was happening. The station felt darker now. Even the working lights seemed dimmer somehow. When I reached the main waiting area, I stopped instantly. The benches were no longer empty. Shapes now sat silently throughout the station. Dark figures wearing long coats and old-fashioned clothing. None of them moved. Some stared toward the tracks. Others sat with heads lowered, perfectly still beneath the weak yellow lights. My breathing became shallow immediately. I slowly raised the flashlight toward the nearest figure. The beam passed across an elderly man sitting near the wall. His clothes looked soaked, old, outdated by decades, and his skin looked strangely pale, almost gray beneath the station lights. Then the man slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes looked completely black, empty, like deep shadows instead of actual eyes. The loudspeaker crackled again above us. Now arriving, platform 2, at that exact moment. Far beyond the station windows, I heard the distant sound of a train horn echoing through the darkness. The train horn echoed through the darkness again. Long, low, distant enough to sound unreal. Every figure inside the station slowly turned toward the windows at the same time, not 1 second apart, all together. The movement felt unnatural immediately, too synchronized, too silent. I stood completely frozen near the waiting benches, still gripping the flashlight tightly. None of the passengers blinked. None of them spoke. They simply stared toward the tracks, waiting. Then, very slowly, one of the figures stood up, an older woman wearing a dark coat. Her movements looked stiff, delayed somehow. Another passenger stood, then another, then several more. Soon, every silent figure inside the station had risen from the benches. The loudspeaker crackled overhead again, static filling the ceiling speakers. Final boarding call. Platform 2. The passengers began walking toward the platform doors. Step, step, step. Dozens of slow footsteps echoed through the station together. Nobody looked at me while passing. Nobody acknowledged me at all. They simply moved forward in silence, like people following a routine repeated countless times before. I backed away carefully, my pulse hammering harder now. Part of me wanted to run immediately, but another part kept watching. I still could not fully understand what I was seeing. The passengers reached the platform doors and slowly disappeared outside into the darkness. The station became quiet again almost instantly. Only the buzzing lights remained, and faint static overhead. I swallowed nervously, then followed them toward the platform, keeping several steps behind. Cold air drifted through the open doors immediately, along with the soft sound of a light, relaxing rain falling outside again. Tiny drops tapped gently against the metal roof above the platform, slow, steady, calming in a strange way despite everything happening around me. Fog moved low across the tracks now, thicker than before. The passengers stood silently near the rails, facing the darkness ahead, and then I saw it, a light appearing far down the tracks. At first, I thought it might be another station lamp, or maybe headlights from a distant vehicle, but the light grew larger slowly, moving closer along the rails. A deep vibration began humming beneath the platform floor. Metal groaned softly around me. And through the fog, the outline of an old train slowly appeared. My entire body went cold. The train looked ancient. Silver paint faded almost black with age. Windows dark and clouded. It moved silently at first, almost gliding through the mist. Then, gradually, the sound reached me. Steel wheels grinding softly against rusted rails. Low mechanical humming and faint rattling from inside the passenger cars. The train finally slowed beside the station platform. Its doors opened with a long mechanical hiss. No conductor stepped outside. No lights glowed from inside the cars. Only darkness waited beyond the open doors. One by one, the passengers began boarding slowly. Their movements remained calm, silent, almost dreamlike. I stared at them without breathing. An elderly man entered the first car. Then, a woman holding an old suitcase. Then several others disappearing quietly into darkness. None of them made any sound while boarding. No conversation, no footsteps, nothing. Then one of the figures stopped before entering and slowly turned toward me. It was the same elderly man I had seen inside the station, the one with the dark, empty eyes. He raised one pale hand slowly and pointed directly toward me. A terrible feeling spread through my chest immediately. The loudspeaker crackled again behind me. Last passenger boarding. I stepped backward instantly, heart racing now. The old man continued staring at me without moving. Then, very slowly, other passengers also turned toward me, one after another. Pale faces emerging through fog. dark, empty eyes fixed silently in my direction. I backed farther away from the train, nearly slipping on the wet platform. The vibration beneath the station floor grew stronger now. The entire platform trembled slightly. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Close footsteps, inside the station entrance. I turned quickly and saw a man standing in the doorway, wearing an old conductor uniform. His clothes looked soaked and worn with age. The brass buttons on his coat dulled beneath the lights, but his face looked wrong, blurred somehow, as if I could not focus on it properly. The conductor tilted his head slightly toward me. "You're not supposed to be here." His voice sounded distant, almost echoing unnaturally. I shook my head slowly, barely able to speak. "I'm leaving." The conductor remained motionless for several seconds. Then he pointed calmly toward the station exit behind me. "Then leave before departure." At that exact moment, the train horn exploded through the night again, much louder this time. The sound vibrated through my chest painfully. Every passenger continued staring directly at me, completely still beside the open train doors. I finally stopped thinking altogether. I turned and ran immediately, back through the station, past the waiting benches, past the dark hallways, past the frozen clocks still showing 2:17. The loudspeaker continued crackling behind me, repeating distorted announcements I could barely understand anymore. My boots slammed loudly against the tile floors, echoes chasing me through the empty building. I reached the front entrance, pushed through the heavy doors, and sprinted toward my truck without looking back. The soft rain still fell steadily around the station, cold air drifting through the parking lot, the entire place glowing faintly behind fog and darkness. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors instantly, and started the engine with shaking hands. For one brief second, I glanced back toward the station. The platform was empty again. No passengers, no train, nothing, only weak yellow lights reflecting across wet pavement. I drove away immediately, faster than I probably should have on those roads. And I never stopped until I reached town again. The next morning, I returned with the property supervisor to explain everything. But when we entered the station, the place looked completely abandoned again. Dust covered the floors untouched. No footprints remained anywhere. The loudspeakers were disconnected, and according to the supervisor, the station had not received power in nearly 12 years. Then I asked him about the clocks. Every clock still showed 2:17. The supervisor became quiet after that. Finally, he explained something the town rarely talked about anymore. Decades earlier, a passenger train had derailed near Belmore Station during a storm. Almost everyone on board died that night. The accident happened at exactly 2:17 a.m. I quit the job later that same week. Now, I only accept work in busy places, bright places, places filled with people and noise. And whenever I hear distant train horns late at night, I always remember that station, the silent passengers, and the old train waiting patiently in the fog, as if it still arrives every night, right on schedule, at 2:17 a.m.